Well, hello again. This is Mr. Hefner, and this is American Literature, 11th grade, and we are currently working on a unit called Frontiers, which covers literature from approximately 1860 all the way up to 1900. And today we're going to take a look at some regional literature. You know that regionalism is important to this time period, and it's going to be a Western. In fact, it's going to be one of the earliest Westerns ever written. It was published in 1869, so it's published just 4 years after the Civil War came to an end. And the story we're going to be reading is called The Outcasts of Poker Flat, and it's written by Bret Harte. It's sort of a sequel. Bret Harte had earlier written a very successful story called The Luck of the Roaring Camp. And in The Outcasts of Poker Flat, he's going to bring the most popular character from that one back for another appearance. So in this story that we're going to take a look at today, our lesson essential question is, how does this regional story use satire to comment on society? And I've italicized two key words. One of them is regional. And you should remember from our introduction on this unit that regionalism is very popular at this time. Readers in the East Coast are in their big cities and they're reading magazines, and they like reading stories that are set in different parts of the United States. So keep in mind, 1876, America is going to celebrate its 100th birthday, but by the time we get there, we have a country that reaches from the Atlantic Ocean all the way to the Pacific Ocean, and most people are never going to see much of it, but they can read about it. And so regionalism is very popular. The key to regionalism, though, is that even though the location may be very different, may be very foreign to the readers still have to connect with the characters. And so the emotional aspect of regionalist stories will still hit home with readers on the East Coast. And the other thing I put here is satire. And satire is going to become more popular as we come through Bret Harte. We've already had satire with guys like Ambrose Bierce, but as we come through Bret Harte and move into Mark Twain, satire is going to be sort of the core of almost everything. Satire is the way that writers, sometimes usually comically, are going to comment on some of the silly things society does. Now, in this story that we're going to read today, I want you to look at the idea of what is an outcast. The title is The Outcasts of Poker Flat. And I know if you look up the definition, you'll see it's someone who's put out, cast out, sent somewhere else. But Bret Harte is going to examine this a little bit deeper. You know, some countries actually have what are called caste systems. You're born into a certain level of society, and no matter what you do, you'll never get out of that because that's where you were born. America, from the time of Benjamin Franklin, has had the idea that if you work hard, you'll succeed, and you can become almost anything. And yet, human beings have always had this unique talent for taking others and assigning them to groups. And what I want you to think of is, in our society today, do we have outcasts? Are there people who just don't seem to belong? Could it be because of a different religious belief or a different political belief, perhaps a different culture? Do they speak a different language? Are they from a different economic class? Why do we put some people on the outside of society? And just because we do that, does that mean they're bad people? And Bret Harte seems to show us in many of his stories that even the people we look down on the most can still have hearts of gold. So that's what I want you to keep in mind as we go through this story. So let's go over Bret Harte real quickly. Bret Harte was born in 1836 in New York State, Albany, the capital of New York. And that's, at first you might assume, well, why is he writing Westerns if he's from New York? But remember, almost nobody was from the West at this time. Everybody was moving to the West from somewhere else. And Bret Harte's mother was a widow. She moved to California, and he went with her at that time. He had a variety of jobs. He worked as a teacher for a while. But when he gets to California in 1854, he's got an informal education. He's going to work a lot of different jobs. And one of them is he rides shotgun with Wells Fargo. So you might have seen Wells Fargo Bank today. It's still the same company as it once was, and they use the stagecoach as part of their logo on their signs. But stagecoaches used to take passengers and mail which often contained valuables, across vast stretches of wilderness where there was no police, there was no law, and you needed somebody to keep you safe. So sitting next up top, above the passenger, sitting next to the driver, was somebody who rode shotgun, literally kept his guns ready in case some stranger would approach this stagecoach too quickly, possibly with the intent of robbing it. And so if you've ever gone for rides with friends in the car and somebody's going to drive and somebody must sit in the back seat and maybe one other person gets to sit in the passenger seat, you or your friends might have called shotgun. It actually comes from the days when the person with the shotgun rode next to the driver to keep everybody safe. Now, Bret Harte worked as a typesetter for a while. Remember, we've had a number of authors in this course who worked as typesetters. When you're working as a typesetter, you're going letter by letter, word by word, with texts that were written by professionals. And I think you get an education by doing that, because so many people who started out as typesetters ended up becoming writers, and many of them without a formal education. He eventually became editor of a magazine called The Overland Monthly, and he published 2 stories that were really going to make him super famous on the East Coast. One of them is called The Luck of the Roaring Camp. And then we have the sequel, which we're going to be taking a look at today, called The Outcasts of Poker Flat. But it was because of these 2 stories that he attracted the friendships of other writers. One of them was Ambrose Bierce. We know what about Ambrose Bierce. We read him in our Slavery in the Civil War unit. He disappeared in Mexico, famous for his dark, dark satire. And Mark Twain, who's a more humorous type of satire, although Mark Twain is quite good at dark satire as well. They're going to be friends. They're going to consult with one another when they're writing. In fact, at one point, Mark Twain even collaborates with Bret Harte on a play. The play fails. It's not a success at all, and I don't know anyone who's read it, and I've never read it, but I do know that it failed. But go back to these 2 stories, The Luck of the Roaring Camp and The Outcasts of Poker Flat. Because they're so loved on the East Coast, one of the most successful, if not the most successful magazine at the time, and it's still around today, The Atlantic Monthly, offers a contract to Bret Harte. They want him to write 1 story a month for a year, and they're willing to pay him $10,000. Now, that doesn't sound like a whole lot today, but I can tell you that was a record for a writer of fiction in those days. As time went on, though, for Bret Harte, it became apparent that many of his stories were the same ideas over and over again. And he felt that perhaps his creativity was waning, and he looked for other ways to make his way in the world and accepted positions working for the United States government as a diplomat. He's going to live out the rest of his year in Europe. He's going to be in Germany for a while, Scotland, and he's actually going to die in 1902 in London, England. Again, what does he get most remembered for? It's the regionalism. I really see him as the father of the American Western. If you've ever seen a Clint Eastwood movie, Western, or a John Wayne Western, or maybe you've seen a Glenn Ford Western going back to the 1950s, these all trace their heritage back to Bret Harte and the kinds of characters he created. There's also the surprise endings, which are always popular in short stories, so I don't give that too much credit. But keep your eyes, again, on the idea of anyone can have a golden heart, even when society looks down on you. Now, from your textbook, you always have the About the Selection portion, and I've already covered all of this, but real quickly again, pay attention to the regionalism, which is 2 things. It's not just looking at depictions of the region where the story takes place, but it's also looking how the human connection between people not in that region with people in that region gets maintained. We've got to be able to connect to the characters. And then the idea of conflict in this one is society against these outcasts and what that means and whether it's ethical and moral. And keep your eyes open for elements of what you would consider to be the classic Western. Now, our literary terms for this, the first one that we're going to have is sentimentality. Sentiment is emotion, and Bret Harte was well known for taking emotion to the nth degree here. So look for this excessive expression of emotion in this story. I got to tell you, there have been many times when I have read this story out loud to classes, and there's a portion in it where I feel my voice starting to break because the emotion of the story is that strong. So take your time with it and allow yourself to feel that. The other thing we've got here is stock character. Now, I know you know what stereotypes are, so let's talk about the idea of stock characters. These are characters that show up again and again and again in different works of literature, and Westerns are famous for them. If you look again at Western movies, you'll often find there's the banker, there's the lawyer, there's the judge, there's the doctor, there's the gunfighter, there's the prostitute, the bartender, the cowman, the cowboy, whatever you want to call him. These characters come back again and again and again, and oftentimes they're characterized in the same way. That's what we call a stock character. Now, a term that I'd like you to look for as well is this term called epitaph, because it's going to be important to this particular story. And I know we've had a lot of epi words in this course so far. We've had epigram, which is just simply a short, pointed, wise saying. We've had epigraph. An epigraph is when Edgar Allan Poe did them a lot, where you have a quote above a story that you're about to read to help set the tone. And now we have epitaph. And I think this is one you probably know, but an epitaph is an inscription that goes on a gravestone. And here's an image of the gravestone of Mel Blanc. If you've ever watched any of those old Merry Melodies or Looney Tunes cartoons with Bugs Bunny and Daffy Duck and Porky Pig, it was Mel Blanc who lent his voice to all of those characters. And so I think this is a great epitaph because those Looney Tunes always ended with, you know, that's all, folks, if you've ever watched those. And Mel Blanc died, and on his tombstone it says, that's all, folks. And I think that's very fitting. All right, now as you read the story today, I want you to look for the regionalism. I want you to look for the conflict between society and the outcasts. And I want you to look for the use of stock characters and feel that sentimentality in the story as you go through this. All right, now this is the point in the story where you are going to stop watching the video. You can pause it and come back to it later. Go read the story, and when you come back here, we will go over the check for understanding questions together. All right, you go. I'll wait right here. Back already? Are you sure you read it? That was pretty quick. All right, well, let's go over the check for understanding questions then. All right, here we go. Beneath this tree lies the body of John Oakhurst, who struck a streak of bad luck on the 23rd of November, 1850, and handed in his checks on the 7th December, 1850. What do we call that kind of thing? It comes at the end of our story. It's part of our denouement, if you will. Yes, that is an epitaph. It's what goes on a tombstone. And in this particular story, Oakhurst didn't have a tombstone, but he put this on the tree above where his body was found. Let's do some quick sentence completions here, some fill in the blanks. You're going to take one of these words and you can always change them. You can capitalize them. You can make them plural, change the form so that they work here. Number one, blank explores issues that are common to all human beings through descriptions of occurrences in a particular time and place. What do we call that? Correct answer would be regionalism. Now, the choice at the top was regional literature, and that's okay too, but that didn't fit in the space, so I used regionalism. Writers use what to evoke excessive emotion in readers? They use sentimentality. And number three, the absent-minded professor is a what? Frequently seen on stage and screen. These really smart professors who can't handle the everyday organizational skills. Correct answer? Yes, stock characters. Let's do a couple true and false questions. Number one, Poker Flat was a quiet, religious town. Absolutely false. They were full of gamblers and prostitutes and drinkers and everything else, but now that they've had trouble, they quickly try to remove all the undesirables from the town. Number two, Mr. Oakhurst never considered leaving his companions. And that also was false. He could have. He had the wherewithal to keep himself alive, but this gambler, who was kicked out of town, was concerned about these other people traveling with him. Number 3, Tom Simpson and Piney Woods planned to be married in the town of Poker Flat. True or false? Yes, that's true. They were on their way from the town of Sandy Bar to get to Poker Flat so that they could be married. Number 4, the group had enough provisions to last for a month. And that is false. At the beginning of the story, they had no provisions. And then when Tom Simpson shows up, they end up with provisions that might last them 10 days, not a month. And number 5, Tom Simpson deserted the group. True or false? And that is false. Tom Simpson went to get help. It was Uncle Billy who deserted them, and in fact stole the mules while he was at it. Let's do a couple multiple choice questions. The residents of Poker Flat were after somebody because what had happened? Yeah, they had lost 2 horses, large sums of money, and somebody had even been murdered. So they figure it's time to clean up their town. How about this one? Uncle Billy laughs when Tom Simpson arrives because Uncle Billy's drunk. Yeah, he's had too much whiskey. How about the next one? According to Mr. Oakhurst, luck is, quote, a mighty queer thing because the only thing certain about it is that it will change. And that is our reversal in the story here. Reversal is going to be another literary term that becomes popular in this period of literature and is almost going to be the rule once we get to modern literature, starting 1900, 1910 or so. But this one, Mother Shipton dies from what? Mother Shipton was the older of the 2 prostitutes. What killed her? Yes, it was starvation. She didn't eat her provisions because she was saving them for the young girl, saving them for Piney Woods, showing us once again that even this hard prostitute who lived a terrible life in the town of Poker Flat cares for others. Next one. The only chance to save Piney Woods is to do what? That's right. Tom has to make it to Poker Flat in 2 days and get help to come back. But it doesn't work because the snow starts and it just keeps snowing and snowing and snowing. Back in the old days, if a sheriff needed to go into the hills to find somebody, he often formed a posse. Just had a bunch of local townspeople grab their guns and sign on, and off they'd go to get that. And this is an actual old picture of a posse. I got this picture from the Library of Congress. But that's the end of this presentation. I just wanted to remind you, always check Schoology to make sure there isn't something else that you should be doing that goes along with this introductory presentation. And as always, I try to keep these short. They always go longer than I want them to. But if you stayed with me till the end, I thank you.